and we're doing the Sports by Brooks on Fancred thing again. It's relentless. It never ends. Sorry, there's no escape. Sorry. Every weekday, noon Eastern time, we kick this off. And today, we're going to talk NFL. We're going to talk about the best stories. The best stories are the Browns and Baker Mayfield, right? OBJ, that situation with Humphrey. And we're going to talk it with an expert on the Browns who's extremely opinionated. A guy who worked for the Cleveland Plain Dealer and was a longtime talk show host in Columbus. He's an expert on the Browns. Bruce Hooley's going to join us. Anybody who's from Central Ohio knows that name. Very famous sports media personality. Been there forever. Great guy. And I'm a big fan of his. So it's really cool to have him on the show because not only is he a Browns guy, but he's also Mr. Ohio State. I don't mean that he's pro-Ohio State or in Ohio State's pocket. No. He is as straight a shooter as they come, and he's going to give us the straight poop on the Ohio State football program and Urban Meyer, because, of course, Urban's still in Columbus. Bruce is a former beat writer. Bruce covered Ohio State, the guy who's coming up with us, for the Cleveland Plain Dealer for decades. And then he's gone on in Columbus to do a talk show. So he is plugged in. So we're going to find out what's going on with Urban in Columbus, right? Nobody's talking about that. And we'll talk Browns with him. That's coming up. Also, the hottest story besides the Browns and Mayfield, the Rams. And I know Cam Smith, our producer, I know you know, Cam, what I've been saying about the Rams. Ding, 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 ding. I called it. Thank you very much. I called it. This is the Real Action Network, Sports by Brooks on Fancred, right? So I've been saying over the last few weeks, two guests, sticking my neck on the line. I'm not just monologuing this. I'm sticking my neck on the line. Remember when I told Ken Carman of Cleveland's 92.3 The Fan? Or maybe you don't remember. I told him, Rams are a house of cards. Don't believe the hype. This is after the Rams had beaten Cleveland on the road. Convinced. And now, and it's all a function of Jared Goff. I mean, he's primarily the issue. And if you've got a secondary that's going to prevent him from throwing underneath, they're screwed. If he can't get the ball to Cooper Kupp, the entire team is screwed. How do I know? Because the offense tailed off dramatically after Kupp went down last season after week 10. All right. So Rams and Bucks happened here at the Coliseum yesterday. And someone who was there and covers the team, he's been on with us before. He does a great job. He's with the Bucks, and he was with the Bucks at their facility. You talk about a nightmare schedule. The fact that he's going on with us is unbelievable because right now they're going through the availability of the team and the coaches in Tampa. But Greg Allman is going to join us from The Athletic. He covers the Buccaneers for The Athletic. Man, these intros are so damn long. But I interweave them into the subjects and the topics of the show. And I've got a lot to say today. So Greg Allman's going to be joining us later in the show. We're going to talk about the Rams and the Bucks. And what was that game? What was it? That was the weirdest thing ever because the strength of the Rams, you could argue, is that defense. And what happened? Jesus, just a total meltdown. So we'll get the scoop. We'll find out what's going on. I may talk a little bit about the Rams if we get an opportunity as well later in the show. But we're going to do it this week. And I'm going to bring my LA guys on to talk about it. So besides that, we're also going to, so we got the NFL here covered. We got the two big stories in the NFL. When I was doing the show, I was getting ready. I was prepping up very early this morning and throughout yesterday. I'm always saying to myself, what is the most interesting, intriguing thing going on in the NFL? And, you have a bunch of games. Look, and if you have a fantasy team, maybe you want to know about those teams where you have players, so you tune into ESPN to get updates on. But in general, what are the compelling storylines? And I think Baker Mayfield, that guy, that one guy, is the most compelling person and storyline in the NFL, at least right now, while they're hanging on. And for all I know, they're going to have a great year. I mean, they're in a very fortuitous situation with that division, with the Bengals and the Steelers. And of course, Baker Mayfield, and we're going to talk to Bruce about this coming up. One more thing. Let me get to our last guest. We got one other guest. His name is Ralph Russo, longtime Associated Press college football reporter. And so in addition to covering the big NFL stories of the day, we're going to have Ralph Russo of the AP come on and talk national college football. And there's a lot of interesting things going on there. Clemson should have lost to North Carolina. All of a sudden, cracks in that facade. Cracks in the facade of Tillman Hall. Pitchfork Bend Tillman Hall on the campus of Clemson University. There's cracks. Too bad. So, but the ramifications of Clemson struggling against North Carolina, then going into this long schedule where they don't play anybody. They don't have another game where they play anybody. It's like they're playing, in a junior college league. It's embarrassing. The ACC is beyond embarrassing. So we'll talk to Ralph about that and Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia. What's happening out here? Does Oregon have a shot to get back in it? I don't think so. Washington, maybe. Who knows? USC, that situation. Of course, we'll cover that here as we're the leader. We are the worldwide leader on USC coaching news. Trust me, we are. Nothing to report right now at this moment, but there could be. The one thing I'll tell you about USC is the new president, who was literally just inaugurated. Her name is Carol Folt, F-O-L-T, Carol. She was the president at the University of North Carolina. She was just inaugurated as the new president of USC, an outsider, which is unusual, very unusual for USC. She actually went up to Seattle for the game. And that's not commonplace for a president of USC to do that. She traveled to Seattle to watch the game involving SC and Washington. And it was the same old story. Very, very predictable. Sloppy mistakes. More talent than the opponent. Unable to scheme. Unable to inspire. Just unable to get the job done. And then following it up, Clay Helton, with cliches, platitudes, encouragement, no accountability at all. It's like they didn't even lose. I mean, it really feels like right now Clay Helton doesn't care. It's not so much that he doesn't want the job. Hey, I'll take it. Free money, right? But it really is like he just doesn't care. And I guess in his situation, you kind of have to be that way because he really has no chance to keep the job. No chance to keep the job. So I want to get into the comments before we get into the subject at hand that I'm going to talk about in a second. We're going to have Bruce on here in a second. Mark, we're going to address that. I want to address that with our guest, Bruce Hooley, Mark. So I'm going to pass along your comment. What the heck do we make of the Browns? Well, that's why I'm having them on, right? Because who knows? I mean, you look at the Rams game, and then you look at the Ravens game. And in the Rams game, the offensive line was putrid. It was a disaster. And so was Baker. Then you look at the Ravens game, it's the opposite. Now, the one big difference is, of course, Mark, the one big difference is Baltimore has a horrible defense, bottom of the league. The Rams have a good defense. Well, at least they did have a good defense until their game against Tampa yesterday. We'll get to that. And we'll also address some other questions that you guys have. I see them I see you, Jeff. I see everybody in the comments, and I'm on top of that. I'm with you. And look, if you want to come on screen, happy to talk to you, man. Hit the fan line button anytime. As long as you're not a psychopath, happy to have you on. I'm not one of these people who I can't even begin. I don't want to go down this road. You guys know how it is. If you watch the show every day, I can go down a rabbit hole. Not that it's not interesting. Of course it is. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole today. I don't have the strength. I was going to do something or talk about, I heard a national radio host this morning, absolutely destroying callers, personal attacks on callers, rejecting them out of hand, ad hominem attacks. It's like, is the guy off his meds, the host this morning? What the hell is he on? What's the problem? Because the scary part is he's one of these guys, and we all know these people. He's happy and, seems to be well adjusted. But then somebody triggers something. And it's not so much something, it's not political, but someone called into the show this morning just to be specific and criticize that host, and he lost his mind. So, and did like 5 minutes screaming at this guy. So just understand, guys, that's not the way I am. It'll never be the way I am. And especially in this format, we want to encourage, and we're going to get it. We're going to get that interactivity as we go along. Because my whole point in launching into that diatribe was that you guys, I know you have something to offer. I know there are certain things that you know more about than I do, because it's humanly impossible for me to know everything about everything in relation to you. So I know that there's some insight out there, perhaps at least. Are you going to be able to articulate that the moment you're on? Maybe not, but that's what I've learned, that there's always someone out there, and you just never know. Whatever their station in life is, they could be a Silicon Valley executive worth $500 million on the Fancred app, hitting the fan line to talk to me about USC football, or they could be a slob like me, right? You just never know. Don't make any assumptions. Don't underestimate anyone or anything. So, but we're going to get into those subjects, the NFL, college football. We do this every day. We're going to cover everything that's going on. We're going to be on it, and we're going to have an angle, and we're going to have a guest like today. Zach Zager is also going to come on today because of the big story out of Sacramento, SB 206, the law that now allows for athletes at USC, Cal, Stanford, and UCLA, along with other schools, all of the schools, Fresno State, that are part of the NCAA. Now, because of this law that just passed today, just signed into law, I should say, it didn't pass, it's signed into law by the governor, right? That is going to allow athletes at these schools, beginning in 2023, to cut side deals where they can benefit off their name and their likeness. And that starts 2023. Now you're going to have all this filibustering, all this obfuscation, right? Well, actually, I take that back, because the story, right, is not something that is, it's not something that is going to help the bottom line of the schools, and thus ESPN and Fox and NBC and CBS are not going to want to highlight something like SB 206, because this could mean a financial shortfall for these California schools if they act. I shouldn't say that eventually it could. That's wrong. But because this could start us on a slippery slope to that. That's what this is. I mean, this is the beginning of that slippery slope. If you can benefit off your likeness, if you can do a deal with the local car wash, whatever it is, and make $500, and you're a football player at UCLA, that changes everything. That's the slippery slope, right? That's the toboggan at the very top of it, right? Of the Matterhorn. And you're about to shove off. And that's what we're doing right now. We're shoving off down the hill. And so where that's going to lead eventually is monetary compensation of the athletes by the schools and guaranteed health care in writing, workers' compensation, if you will. That is the ultimate goal. It shouldn't be a sort of holy grail, but it is, which is a commentary on what's happening in our country today. It's a disgrace. When you consider that college football makes more money than Major League Baseball and the NBA. It's second only to the NFL amongst commercial spectator sports, right? So we're starting down that slope today. We really are. This is a real thing. How do I know it's real? How do I know it's real? Ask the people in the North Carolina legislature. Ask the people in the New York legislature. And I know there's other legislatures now that are looking to pass similar laws. They're already greasing the skids to make it happen, to mobilize. Why would they do that? They would do it because if you're recruiting for USC football or UCLA basketball, and you can tell a recruit, we're going to put you in a situation where you can make money off your name and likeness, but hey, schools in other states can't do that. That's a huge advantage for SC, UCLA, Cal. And God knows they need one right now, right? In every sport, basketball and football, all those schools are horrible. So we're going to bring up Bruce Hooley now. He's in Columbus, Ohio. And this is awesome that I'm getting to have Bruce Hooley on the show to talk Ohio State football. And it is, Bruce. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show. And Cleveland Browns, you name it, Urban Meyer, we're going to cover it. But thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's always great to be on with you, Brooks. Looking forward to it.
Now, it looks like it's nicer there than it is here. What's the weather there today?
We got a heat wave here. It's sunny and around a last blast of summer.
Wow, that's crazy. So I want to first touch on really, I was talking about it earlier today. I think the most intriguing story, so long as they remain competitive, of the season will be Baker Mayfield. Mm-hmm. That guy, not the Browns necessarily, but it all runs through him. I mean, just tell me, what are your impressions? What do you think of Baker Mayfield?
Well, I guess I'm old school enough that I would prefer that maybe he didn't punch down at people like Rex Ryan and didn't concern himself so much with everything that's going on around him that, in my view, doesn't have anything to do with winning. When you look at the guys like Tom Brady and Drew Brees and the great quarterbacks, Russell Wilson, I don't know that they really spend any time on that involves other people's assessments of them. But, Baker has this walk-on mentality. He's the number one overall pick in the NFL draft, Heisman Trophy winner, and his product line is walk-on gear. So maybe he's got a Draymond Green thing going there, and he can't ever forget the 20 guys taken ahead of him. Draymond can't in the NBA draft, and maybe Baker feels like he can never play unless he's chip on the shoulder guy. But in terms of just, does he possess what a guy needs to win at the NFL level? He definitely does. He's accurate. He's a leader. His teammates follow him. His city likes him. Believe me, I've suffered through a ton of bad Browns quarterbacks who didn't have the community behind them. So all those things are in Baker Mayfield's favor. And yesterday, that game to me is not any mystery. He played much better than he did on Monday night. That's why the Browns won.
Now, did he play much better because the Ravens' defense is terrible, or are they just playing better?
Well, I think that helps, but I think we see it every week in the NFL. A team that looks terrible one week can look great the next week. Case in point, Tampa Bay losing at home to Daniel Jones and goes on the road and hangs 55 on the Rams. So it's hard to win a game in the NFL. They're all pros. If you're not paying attention, you can get surprised. So I think the Browns were challenged and realized that this game against Baltimore was almost a must-win game for them when you consider that they have the Niners on the road on Monday night and then New England on the road. If you fall to 1-3, you're looking at 1-5. You're not making the playoffs from 1-5. So there's a big difference between 2-2 and 1-3, and the Browns played like they had that urgency.
Do you think Freddie Kitchens is the long-term solution there at coach?
I'd love to be able to give you a hot take on that. It's a little bit soon for me to be able to commit one way or the other. I do like the fact that he, took the bullet for the Monday night loss when I know that was a Baker Mayfield check on the 9 draw play to Nick Chubb. I think it's good when a leader looks in the mirror when they lose and looks out the window when they win. By looking out the window, I mean he points to the other guys on the team and says, that's the reason we won. Those other guys, not me. So I like that. I like the fact that he learned schematically. He didn't run Nick Chubb on the goal line against the Rams at the end. Yesterday, we saw a lot of Nick Chubb running the football with Baker Mayfield under center, which gives Nick Chubb a chance to get a head start toward the line of scrimmage. And with 165 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns, first time the Ravens defense has been taken to the woodshed like that by a running back since 2002. So I think in terms of the Freddie Kitchen question, he did learn. I do like some of his leadership tendencies. I also could do with some less of his punching down, where he seems way too aware of what other people are saying about him.
We're talking to Bruce Hooley in Columbus, Ohio. Bruce is a longtime sports journalist, talk show host, and now podcaster. He does a podcast called Spielman and Hooley. Of course, that's Chris Spielman, Ohio State legend, NFL legend as well. Chris Spielman and Bruce Hooley are on this podcast, Bruce. We Tackle Life is the name of it, and it's available 4 times a week on iTunes and all podcast platforms. You guys talk football, family, faith, you name it. And, of course, it's Spielman and Hooley, We Tackle Life. Now, did I get that right, or did I butcher the hell out of it?
No, you did great. Just search Spielman and Hooley on your favorite podcast platform. We're about a month into it. We've had great response from people, and we really enjoy doing it. As I'm sure this format for you, Brooks, it frees you up in a lot of ways that over-the-air terrestrial radio does not. So we're really enjoying it.
Oh, dude, this is so awesome. And I've talked about this. I forgot who I was talking. I think it was Tony Bruno was on the show. You know, Tony Bruno, the longtime national guy, and now he's back in Philly. And I was telling him, one morning I just wanted to get an Eagles-Packers breakdown from sports radio. And I literally listened to commercials all morning. Now, it was one of those things where I was flipping around to different stations trying to get that information, and then I would hit their commercials, right? Yeah. But I'm just ready to blow my brains out. And that's why it's such a godsend to have you and Spiels, right? You had your longtime radio show in Columbus with Chris Spielman, the Morning Drive show. But now it's commercial free and you can seek it out when you want it. So that's a great show. What you and Chris have done in that marketplace is just unbelievable. So, but I want to get into the Buckeyes now. Speaking of Chris Spielman, right, and the Buckeyes, because to me, I think along with Auburn and LSU, Ohio State is the most intriguing team right now that you just don't know about, at least if you're me. It seems like, Bruce, the whole freaking country is anointing Ohio State now after the Nebraska game. Where are you at on the Buckeyes?
Well, so much of grading a team to me is what's left for them and what have I seen from them so far. And this is just one of those years where I don't know if Ohio State has ever had a more friendly schedule than they face. They don't play a Power 5 team non-conference. TCU asked out of their 2-year contract with Ohio State, so there's no Power 5 opponent. They blew through the non-conference. And their Big Ten schedule is such that everybody tough that they play, I know right now the Michigan fans are going, wait a minute, the Michigan game's on the road. Sorry, I don't consider that a tough game based on what I saw at Wisconsin. They've got Penn State at home, Ohio State does. They've got Wisconsin at home. They got Michigan State this week. And really the Big Ten, Brooks, other than Ohio State, not very impressive. So I don't see this team losing a game in the regular season. They're going to be a playoff team, and then they'll be tested for the first time by comparable athletes, comparable depth. I think back in the NBA era where we had Warriors and Cavs was a preconceived, a known commodity before the season began. I think right now we can throw a blanket over 6 teams and probably know that's where our 4-team playoff is coming from. It's Oklahoma, Ohio State, Clemson, Bama, Georgia, LSU, and maybe Auburn, although with a freshman quarterback, I don't believe in Auburn. So I say it's 6 teams for 4 spots, and I would say if I had to bet one team as being a certainty to get in because of who they play, or rather who they don't play and where they don't play them, they don't have a team left on their schedule that to me looks like a daunting opponent, and nor does Clemson. But what I saw out of Clemson on Saturday, they look a lot to me like Ohio State in 2015 when Ohio State was the defending national champion, had Joey Bosa, Zeke Elliott, Cardale Jones, J.T. Barrett, had everybody back from their championship team and just sort of seemed to be trapped in a malaise or some kind of a hangover. That's what I see with Clemson right now.
Now, Ohio State, of course, does play Wisconsin this year, and it's in Columbus. Yeah. And when you're talking, and we didn't. I think you mentioned Wisconsin, but briefly. And it's funny because we think exactly the same. But as I was coming on the show with my producer Cam Smith, and we were talking about subjects, and I was looking at the rankings, and I was like, Wisconsin is number 8. And so, right. So people hearing this might say, especially if they're Wisconsin fans, what about Wisconsin? I mean, is that the number 8 team in the country?
Well, they got outscored on offense by Northwestern on Saturday in Madison. That would be my answer to that. And Northwestern has
and they're still number 8.
And they're still number 8. They needed 2 defensive touchdowns to win that game. They've never had any luck running the football. Jonathan Taylor hasn't against Ohio State. Look at Ohio State's defensive numbers this year. Look at the way they shut down a Nebraska offense. And again, I'm not giving Nebraska. Nebraska's not Tommy Fraser, Scott Frost, Nebraska. But they did put up 600 yards and change against Illinois, and they barely got over 200 against Ohio State. So this is a much different Ohio State defense this year. They're playing free and loose and fast and with a lot of energy. And I think a lot of that has to do with Ryan Day. I mean, I equate Ryan Day to being kind of the guy who's left in charge when the taskmaster boss leaves the office, and everything in the office runs great for a while. How long, I don't know, but I think Ryan Day is the perfect coach for this team at this time. And the players are playing a lot more loose because it's just a little bit of a fresh breeze in the building now that the proving ground that Urban Meyer coaches with, where every day is a challenge, every day is, do you deserve your scholarship today? I think the players are playing fast and loose and free without that hanging over their heads.
We're visiting with Bruce Hooley of the Spielman and Hooley podcast. You can get that podcast anywhere where you listen to your podcast, iTunes, any platform. Bruce is a longtime sports journalist covering the Buckeyes beat. How many years did you cover it for the Cleveland Plain Dealer?
18 years for the Plain Dealer, and now about 12 in radio and digital.
Right. So 30 years experience as we talk Ohio State football. Just keep that in mind because he's boots in the ground in Central Ohio. So a big question, I think the question for me is Justin Fields, because of course the guy's got unbelievable athletic ability and he's shown amazing flashes so far. But what about the passing game? What's going to happen? And it may not happen in the regular season. It may not happen until we get to the playoff. But what's going to happen when he faces a good secondary?
Yeah, that's the unknown. You know, as I handicap what I think will be the playoff, you know, if you picture it with Alabama and Clemson and Oklahoma in there, Justin Fields is as great as he's been this year. He's got 16 touchdown passes and no interceptions. I think he has 7 touchdowns on the ground. He's going to be the least experienced quarterback in that playoff. As good as he is, Ryan Day will be the least experienced coach. Now, does that moment get too big for Justin Fields at the time? I don't know. I know this. It'd be a really interesting question. Which team has the deepest receiving core in America? Because Alabama's loaded at receiver. Clemson is loaded at receiver. So is Oklahoma. And so is Ohio State. I mean, it's really Justin Fields benefits from a really strong running game. The offensive line at Ohio State's playing great. And the receivers that he has, it's really hard to pick a guy to shut down. So far he's playing very well. I didn't see this out of him at Georgia a year ago. I'm not sure they used him right, but boy, Ryan Day identified him once he entered the transfer portal, and he's getting everything you would have expected out of a 5-star like Justin Fields. He's getting it out of him.
What's the difference between Ryan Day and Urban Meyer?
I think Ryan Day is a guy who his players play hard for him because he emphasizes a culture of playing for each other. I think Urban's overriding motivation was almost like a survival of the fittest. You're here to get to the NFL. I'm not sure if playing for Ohio State, even though Urban's an Ohio guy, and even though he I know the history of Ohio State meant a lot to Urban. I'm not sure that he coached for the name on the front of the jersey as much as he did for guys getting to the league. And there's nothing wrong with that. When you coach 7 years and you never win less than 11 games and you never lose more than 2, nobody can say you didn't have a great era.
But you're essentially a recruiter, right? You're not so much a coach.
Yeah, and Urban was recruiting every second. And I think on Fox now he's still recruiting for Ohio State with some of the things he says about Ryan and some of the things he says about how he coached. But I just think Ryan is more of a guy who gets the college thing. And I think his players understand that he has his best interests at heart. And again, it's hard to talk about Ryan Day and say good things about him without people assuming, oh, you're saying bad things about Urban or you're taking shots at Urban. The challenge for Ryan Day, Brooks, will not be – I think a lot of people thought this would be the challenge. Oh, he's got an inexperienced quarterback and he's stepping in for Urban Meyer. 2019 will be the referendum on Ryan Day. 2019 will not be the referendum on Ryan Day any more than 2001 was the referendum on Larry Coker. I mean, you can inherit a great program and you can keep it running for a while. Miami program didn't fall off the cliff until the second game till the final game of the second season of Larry Coker. The challenge for Ryan Day will be, can he keep this going after the Urban Meyer influence filters out of the program? And those players that are in there now remember what it was like when the big bad wolf was in the building. 3, 4, 5 years down the road, what does Ohio State look like? That's going to be when the referendum on Ryan Day will come into focus.
And that's how it always works. Visiting with Bruce Hooley. He's in Columbus, longtime sports media personality, Central Ohio, of the Spielman and Hooley podcast. Now, let's get to the cool stuff, the fun stuff, the juicy stuff. Urban Meyer.
Yeah.
I know you're as much of an expert probably as anybody in the media, but we talked at length to Doug LeMaurice of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, who you know, and he spent some time with Urban lately, but talking to my sources as well, the indication that I'm getting, and of course we're out here in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Coliseum is right behind me. But the indication I'm getting at this point, Bruce, is that because Urban has all of these existing roots in Ohio, and the nature of his departure was in part because of the medical condition, the idea that he could come into USC now, next season, is a non-starter. Would you agree with me on that?
I do. I think it's a little bit soon. The thing with Ohio State was they didn't need a coach until Urban had been out of it a year. And if USC is going to move on from Clay Helton in the next couple of weeks, or even in this offseason, I'm not sure that timing works for Urban. And one of the things that Urban will want if he returns to coaching is he'll want, for lack of a better term, his Meyer Mafia to go with him. And those are all the guys from Ohio State that he brought with him from Florida, and a lot of guys he brought with him from Utah. It's Mark Pantoni, his director of football operations. It's Mickey Marotti, his strength coach. It's Brian Voltolini, the guy who we think deleted the text messages on Urban's phone. It's I call him Winston Wolf Tolini because he's like the guy from Pulp Fiction who makes all the bad stuff go away.
Right.
Urban can't bring those 3 guys with him wherever he goes. I think he would have a harder time committing someplace, but I do think the longer you're away from the game, the less fresh in your mind the medical issues are, and the more you tell yourself you can delegate authority. He did delegate authority early on at Ohio State, but then once you get back in the moment, once you get so close to winning, I think it's hard to keep your hands off the steering wheel. So I certainly would never say he'll never coach again. I think a college game would be awesome to have him back, and I think he'd win wherever he went. I think Urban Meyer at USC is an absolute home run. I'm just not sure if 2020 is the ideal timing for him to do that.
It's ironic because, from just a pragmatic standpoint, looking at it topically, superficially, you couldn't have a better home run. Because when you look at his pattern, he goes to the SEC, it's virgin territory for him, and he goes in and takes over recruiting until Saban arrives. And then Saban starts to win, and he starts to beat Urban. And then Urban departs, goes to Ohio State, and does it all over again. And it's probably a lot easier at Ohio State. And so then you look at the USC situation. I mean, you talk about low hanging fruit for Urban. You've got as good a recruiting base regionally as any school. You've got the legacy, you got the tradition, you've got an existing intact rock. You got to be kidding. So I'm sure he's eating his heart out right now. But I wanted to ask you about the possibility that Urban may sit out, because he's invoked the name Mac Brown in recent weeks. Do you think this may be a situation where he sits out for 5 years and then maybe looks at a Notre Dame?
Well, Chris Spielman and I have had that conversation on our podcast. Chris is of the opinion that Notre Dame and USC are the two places that Urban would find it hard to say no to. Let me throw a curveball at you. What if 2-3 years from now, Bill Belichick retires with the New England Patriots, and Ryan Day, who's a New Hampshire native, is the guy that Bob Kraft comes after to coach the New England Patriots? I wouldn't rule out Urban Meyer with a second run at Ohio State because he's in Columbus, because he's established. I do think, I think it drove him crazy to be in the LA Coliseum a few weeks ago when Utah was there. If USC wants him, I think if I'm a USC mover and shaker, I try to get the Fox guys to put Urban in the Coliseum, or at least on a campus site as often as you can, to get those juices flowing. But he's got a pretty cushy life in Columbus, Ohio. He's got a restaurant that just opened up. And I don't know if Ryan Day is a career guy at Ohio State. And I wonder how Urban Meyer is going to process it in January if Ryan Day is on a podium holding a crystal football with a team that Urban thinks he could have won a national championship with.
Right there, man. The light bulb just went on, because you don't see Ryan Day doing the rah-rah stuff on the podium. Very interesting. And if there was ever a guy who comported himself like an NFL coach, it's Ryan Day. Hey, by the way, and we got to let you go, but if you could do me a favor, go to Urban's restaurant. Are you going to go to Urban's restaurant and maybe sample some of the food there?
I'm not sure that's my scene, but if you want to expense me, I might do that.
Invoice me, right? Because I want a full report. What kind of restaurant is it?
It's called Urban Meyer's Pine House. Beyond that, I really don't know anything.
Right. And you have no interest in going there, right?
Not really, no.
Absolutely no interest. Same here, right? Never mind. But hey, I can't thank you enough. Got to have you back on, Bruce. Thanks so much. And best of luck with the Spielman and Hooley podcast, right? The Spielman and you can get it anywhere you get your podcasts, iTunes, any other platform. And also, any Ohio State fan out there, Sports Illustrated now is getting into the school sites, si.com. Go there, click on colleges, click on Ohio State, and you'll go to my site. You get Spielman and Hooley videos. You get insight into Ohio State Buckeyes. So looking forward to being back on the freaking beat. Awesome. I'm sorry I mentioned that. Is awesome. Go to si.com, go to Ohio State, and you'll find Chris Spielman, Bruce Hooley. That's phenomenal. This guy is great. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you, Brooks. Have a great day.
That's Bruce Hooley in Columbus. Now we're going to be joined by Zach Zager who has joined us before from Law 360. And all of a sudden, everybody's showing up to the party on SB 206 being enacted, signed into law. Everybody, all of a sudden, Zach is joining the party. They're on the bandwagon. You were out in front of everybody when nobody was really paying that much attention in the big mass mainstream media. And so what are your thoughts right now? Or is there any reason to look at this any differently than before the moment that Newsom signed it?
I think it's very significant that Newsom has signed the bill because, obviously that paves the way for it to come into to be enacted and to come into effect in 2023. But there wasn't a lot of doubt that he wasn't going to sign it, or that he was at least going to let the time that he had to veto it pass, and thereby allowing it to take effect by inaction. It seems though he did have a few weeks to do it, more weeks to do it. Now that he's done it, things will really move forward. But like I said, people were expecting this to go through after the legislature passed it.
So when you say move forward, what does that mean?
What do you mean?
When you said now that you've got the governor has signed it, and now we're moving forward off of that. So what do you think are the next? I mean, we've got till 2023
right
until this is implemented. So my first question is why is it going to take 3 years to implement it?
Well, that's the date that the bill set for it to come into effect. And I believe that was put in there to allow schools to make necessary adjustments as they prepare their future recruiting classes. So the bill won't actually take effect until January 1st, 2023. That will also give the NCAA and the schools some time to work out exactly what's going to happen between now and then. But what we've seen in the meantime is a number of other states are starting to jump on the bandwagon, so to speak. We've seen a bill introduced in New York. There's been some rumblings. I spoke to a couple lawmakers in South Carolina who say they plan to push forward a bill in their state. The legislative sessions in those states don't start up until beginning of next year. So we could have some more time, but we are seeing a broader push and some more traction among lawmakers in other states to take similar or to pass similar measures.
Do you think that that's an indication that this thing is going to take hold, whether or not it gets ensnarled in litigation in California or not?
Well, I think we've seen just in general a huge change in the attitudes among a number of fans, among media, and a growing push from the athletes themselves to change the current system. And you see that with SB 206, the bill in California. It got the support of LeBron James, of Ed O'Bannon, the former UCLA player who had sued the NCAA a few years ago, and Diana Taurasi as well. And the way the governor signed it, it was on this LeBron James uninterrupted video. It was really unique. I've never seen anything quite like that. But it does show how this issue of whether or not college athletes should be paid is becoming more and more people are paying attention to the issue.
And this was just kind of my reaction response to it. And I actually thought this before this, getting LeBron James and his show involved, that the governor was grandstanding a little bit, going on some of the talk shows and all of a sudden just popping up out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And I mean, because I think this guy has presidential aspirations. I don't think that's really a secret. I mean, what's your impression? Or if you have one?
Obviously, the way this bill moved through the California state legislature, it seemed to be one of those issues that lawmakers could really grandstand on.
But he didn't necessarily have influence in getting this thing passed. No, the governor, he didn't need to.
No, I mean, from what I understand, this was pushed by Nancy Skinner,
right?
And there was some people that were involved in prior litigation had kind of consulted her on that, on the issues. But it is something that Governor Newsom, if you look back, he has made protection of college athletes a priority. What was interesting though is this did pass with bipartisan support, and so it wasn't necessarily a Democrat or Republican issue, and people that were against it seemed to just not vote on the issue. That instead of putting their name on the record as voting against it.
We're visiting with Zach Zager of Law 360 talking about SB 206, which was signed by Governor Newsom in the state of California, going to be enacted now into law. And we've got a comment from Megan who's watching the show. And she wants to know, Zach, which state do you think is going to be the next to follow California in this fair pay-to-play thing?
That's hard to say. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if New York did do this. But, of course, New York doesn't have a number of major college universities outside of maybe Syracuse and some other St. John's and basketball, but it doesn't have like a big Alabama, Ohio State, Penn State kind of anchor school. It would be really interesting if we did see, like, say, Pennsylvania move forward. South Carolina, the lawmakers there have said that they're going to introduce a bill, and obviously that's the home of the University of South Carolina,
Clemson,
and the SEC, and Clemson University, of course. So, I mean, that would be big. I imagine though in that state there might be more debate, and they may hold back before actually passing something. But if we do see other states move forward with this, and these lawmakers in these states see that as giving, say, a California school an advantage, it would be really interesting if, like, in Alabama or South Carolina, like we just said, just went through and passed, because that would really signal a huge shift.
This is an incalculable dilemma for, let's say, the state of Alabama, which derives so much. It identifies so much with the University of Alabama and Auburn University football teams, because this is one big, massive hedge. You're waiting. You're waiting to see if this gets implemented. And as a practical matter, USC has a recruiting advantage against our school. Now we're going to mobilize the legislature. But until then, we want to maintain this model, and we want to wait. I mean, this is just me talking, and we want to wait and see if the NCAA is going to be able to insinuate itself into that California law and, create a situation where it's under control from the NCAA perspective. I mean, don't you think that's going to be the goal here? The NCAA is going to try to come in and try to place parameters on things, and with the threat of, we're going to kick them out of the NCAA if you don't do this?
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be the probably the least disruptive path, is if the NCAA somehow found a way, like you said, to keep a hold of this thing, put some parameters on it that makes the NCAA happy and still gives the NCAA some control. I think that it's going to be difficult, though, because the NCAA has just maintained this idea where they do not want to have anything that can be considered pay for play. And so, I mean, I don't know how you reconcile that. And I think that's why we've talked in the past about this potentially ending up in some litigation. But if it's not just California, if it's more states, even states like Pennsylvania or New York, that do move forward, that's going to just create more pressure on the NCAA to actually, relax its rules and significantly.
Well, I mean, you could certainly make the argument that it's I wouldn't call it a happy medium, but it's kind of a hedge towards that full compensation model. Yes. Albeit an inequitable one as well.
Yeah, it is somewhat of a hedge. It's in between having the schools actually pay the players, though the New York bill and what the lawmakers in South Carolina have suggested, it would include provisions where schools would have to pay players. But that doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily free for the schools, because right now the NCAA and the schools control all of these name, image, and likeness rights. And now some of that money that goes to the schools, and say like a Under Armour, Nike, or Adidas signs a school for millions of dollars. I mean, those are well known. Some of that money, some of that pie is going to go directly to the players, not to the athletic departments. So there could be a redistribution of the pie, so to speak, the money that's available going directly to the players rather than the schools. But I think when you have, right now it's just California, there's some big schools, UCLA, USC, Stanford, Cal in California. But if it's more and more schools, it's going to be very difficult for the NCAA to take a hardline stance where they say we're going to kick all of these schools out or prevent them from competing in the NCAA tournament. Those are some of the biggest names that people go and watch and tune in to see, are those some of those schools. So the more states that get behind this, the more pressure is going to be on the NCAA to make some significant changes.
You touched on this. You touched on this just a second ago in your answer, talking about the principle of the athletes getting the money through deals that are cut by the schools or the NCAA. So they're not dealing direct with a guy who runs a hamburger stand locally. I would presume that that's the number one thing that the NCAA, if we're going to have to implement this, if we're forced to, try to set it up where, and I'll give you a hypothetical, the EA Sports, college football game that used to come out doesn't come out anymore because of what we're talking about, because of the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit. But now it might be a situation where the NCAA says, hey, look, we'll stop fighting this if you will, as individuals, agree not to cut those individual deals. We'll do a licensing deal, a big deal with EA Sports, and we'll distribute the money, and it's going to be equal. So you're going to be appealing to the equanimity of everybody, right? That's what I would foresee the NCAA doing if their backs were up against the wall. And I'm not saying it might not just go through as is right now. I don't know.
I think what you just described is possibly where the NCAA and this working group could have eventually gotten to. But I mean, the NCAA, the way
they don't want to acknowledge it.
Yeah, and they didn't. I don't think they wanted to open up that can of worms or start to go down that path. But now that this bill is passed, I mean, it would open up broader opportunities for college athletes. The bill would include some restrictions, like athlete wouldn't be able to sign like a shoe deal to wear a shoe that's contrary to the school shoe contract, but then the player maybe could wear that shoe in other contexts outside of competing for the school. So it wouldn't necessarily prevent it, but it could limit it. So there is some control in the California bill. But I mean, as I said before, now that the NCAA is kind of quickly losing control of the issue.
And and I know you got to get out. I'm going to get you out of here. But the last thing I really wanted to say is, the only reason we're talking about this, and it's so absurd to even ponder it because it's so without rules on how this could work and all the scenarios we're playing out. There's a trillion more. Well, the whole reason this all exists is because of the patented unfairness of not compensating the athletes in the first place. And so now we're like jumping through hoops trying to figure out how this thing would work. And maybe it will work. Maybe it'll work out. But it's a fundamental issue. And to me, in some ways, it's not a disappointment. It's progress because we haven't had any. But I guess it's at least a step in the right direction.
Well, and I think that opinion that you just espoused there is one that's growing among fans and media members. So I think that is really behind this push, is people are seeing some of the unfairness there, where the athletes are putting their time and their lives on the line here in these sports.
Literally.
Literally. Their bodies in these games. They are compensated with an education, but one could make arguments about what the quality of that education is. And also, I mean, the school, it's not an equitable distribution. It's not one in which the athletes have a lot of negotiating or bargaining power. They don't have any. So a bill like this one that was signed by Governor Newsom would, have the effect of kind of shifting that and redistributing that wealth. I don't think it would necessarily destroy college sports, but it would definitely will change things as we know it, or as we've known them for the past, few decades.
Zach, I really appreciate it. Thanks for jumping on short notice. That's Zach Zager. Yeah, I'm happy to have you here, and we're going to have you back, of course. That's Law 360, Zach Zager joining us, talking about SB 206 that was just signed into law today by Governor Gavin Newsom. Coming up, we're going to talk to Ralph Russo. We're going to get into college football talk. We're going to go around the country. We're going to drill down on what matters, right? With the best in the business. He's been doing it forever. Ralph Russo of the Associated Press will join us. And I appreciate your comments. If you're watching the show for the first time, feel free to comment on the show. There'll be opportunities where you could jump on screen with me on the fan line. Right now, we've got a guest coming up, but we will have that opportunity. We will have some of that space during the course of the show, some time when I get into some of the topics and the subjects that you hear me talk about, at least in the past on this show, plus on my Twitter. I'm on Twitter all day at SportsbyBrooks, as you obviously know. And so we've got a lot of things flying through the air on my Twitter feed today. But I want to address specifically college football with Ralph Russo coming up. And I think there could be some really interesting developments in the sport as we head towards really the beginning of the season. It's funny to say this, but we're still literally coming out of the preseason for most of the big conference heavies, right? Alabama hasn't played anybody. Ohio State hasn't played anybody. Even Auburn, which has played 2 conference games at A&M and against Mississippi State at home, those teams have proven to be inferior, mediocre teams. I think inferior describes Mississippi State, and mediocre more than likely describes Texas A&M. We'll see how they finish, but they have been, like Texas A&M can so often be, a big disappointment this year. I was on the bandwagon, and I was banging the drum for Texas A&M. It hasn't worked out for the Aggies and Jimbo Fisher, but I do think that's a sleeping giant. I mean, why wouldn't it be? Look at what Jimbo was able to do with nothing. Make chicken salad out of chicken, at Florida State. They've got nothing there, no facilities, no revenue, no recruiting budget, won the national title. No reason why he can't do that in spades at Texas A&M. He may be poised to take over the conference. I know I've talked about it before. And when it comes to the SEC, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens to Clemson specifically as we go through the season because of what happened on Saturday. Clemson very nearly lost its game against North Carolina. North Carolina is a team that has shown flashes, but I know has at least one really bad loss. I'd have to let me look at North Carolina football. But this is a team that should have beaten Clemson yesterday, or I should say on Saturday. And North Carolina this year, let me take a look at this because I wanted to make this point. You may remember them beating Miami. Oh, they beat Miami. Mac Brown's taking over the program. The Tar Heels are back, right? What happens 2 weeks later? Appalachian State 34, North Carolina 31. So obviously, and of course, North Carolina opened its season with a win over South Carolina. So, I mean, it's infinite confusion. We're still in that area of the schedule, which to me, the lack of standardization in college football, it is absurd. And look, it's a tradition to do the non-conference scheduling independently. That's fine. Schools to schools, right? But when you look at the different number of conference games that are played by the Pac-12 and the SEC and the Big Ten, playing a different number of conference games, that's unacceptable. We've got to have some standardization. And, here's the thing. If we're going to have a playoff, let me tell you what's going to have to happen. Number one, right, if we expand, it will be because the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are lobbying the networks like crazy to write a check. And that's it, right? Now, the Big Ten, they want to expand the playoffs, right? They want to expand the playoffs. So that's going to give them an opportunity to participate. By the way, are we looking at Ralph Russo at the top of the hour? Cam Smith, our producer, is piloting the ship today. Just double checking. Okay. So because we're getting into this whole principle of the college football playoff, right? And how college football operates with its schedule. You look at Ohio State right now. No one has any idea how good that team is. You would never know it, but no one has any idea. Nebraska should have lost to Illinois, and Illinois is horrible. One of the worst FBS teams, that's out there. Illinois is, we go down this, go down this road. Who lost to who? I understand that. I think Illinois lost to Eastern Michigan, something like that. Western Michigan. But Nebraska is a bad team, right? Ohio State hasn't beaten anybody. We have no idea how good that team is, right? So we're going to sail through to game 6, and we still aren't going to know a lot because they've got 2 more games to go, including Michigan State, which shouldn't be much of a test. They're going to be 8-0, and we're going to be clueless, have no idea what's going on with the Buckeyes. Now, that team is in the Big Ten Conference. The Big Ten Conference, they want to expand the playoff. Let us in, right? Why? The SEC, by the time Ohio State plays a decent team, Auburn will have played LSU, Florida, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, and Oregon, right? By the time Ohio State, I think, plays Wisconsin at home, which is ranked number 8 right now. Okay? That Big Ten Conference, they want to have their cake and eat it too. The other thing is Think about the popularity of, let's say, that championship game that just went off in Santa Clara. Remember at the 49ers Stadium, Clemson and Alabama, and how little buzz there was for it, right? Little buzz. What's the justification for the networks? Because the television ratings for the playoffs aren't an improvement for the most part on the regular season rivalry games. You know, if there's a lot on the line for Auburn and Alabama, whatever it may be, it doesn't even have to be a lot on the line. You know, Notre Dame and USC, it's going to rate. Oklahoma, Texas, it's going to rate, right? It's an analogy would be, think about March Madness. And we brushed over this the other day with a guest. I can't remember who it was. Think about Jeff Goodman that's who it was. We talked to Jeff Goodman, I think, earlier this week. We were talking about the NCAA FBI investigation into college basketball. But the analogy I want to draw with college football's postseason to college basketball is this. The first couple of weekends of March Madness are by far the most popular weekends, and they rate the highest for television ratings. This is in the first couple of weekends of March Madness. By the time we get down to the Final Four, of course there's interest, but that interest isn't nearly what it was because everybody's been knocked out or had their bracket busted by then. They're not watching the games. That's what's motivating them to watch the games. Of course, the whole thing is contrived. It's one big stupid lottery. You know, it's all gamble. That's fine. I mean, it's fun. It's cool. And most people some people aren't gambling or not spending any substantial amount of money. All right. Now let's think about college football, right? The regular season is everything. And it's not so much about who wins the national championship, because if it was, we would have had a playoff 100 years ago. We'd have a playoff for a last 100 years. We haven't. That's not a coincidence. It's never been a priority. It's never been something that the schools wanted, or up until now, the television networks wanted. The only reason we have a college football playoff is one man, John Skipper, decided it was a good idea when he was running ESPN. He now runs the Zone. But he decided to be a good idea to do a college football playoff, convinced the suits at Disney to write a huge check, and that's why we have it. That's it. That's the whole reason. It's not because it's fair or equitable. That has nothing to do with anything. So remember that when you hear talk of expansion. I mean, we're talking about a sport that has existed for 150 years, and we're just getting to a playoff. And one guy woke up on the right side of the bed, and he wrote a check, and here we are. So let's go out now to Ralph Russo, the Associated Press. Ralph, a venerable reporter, college football, college basketball. I follow him closely on Twitter. And he was flying through my timeline yesterday. Nose to the grindstone. Ralph Russo of the Associated Press. And Ralph, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for your patience, by the way, too. Thanks so much.
No worries.
So I was just talking about what the developments that we're seeing with down the road, the college football playoff, and how that may interface with schools like Clemson. Now, I'm not saying if Clemson goes undefeated, they're not going to make the college football playoff. But if they keep having close shaves with this ACC schedule, and then you see other schools that are running the table creeping up, is there a possible scenario you think where Clemson could go undefeated and not make the playoff?
Here's what I would say to that. I would say probably not, only because I go with the theory that if you look at sort of even the recent history of college football, you generally don't get that many undefeated teams. So it's not necessarily because I think if there are 6 undefeated teams at the end, Clemson could get, or 4 or 5, let's say, Clemson could get nudged out. Like, that's conceivable. But what I would tell you is very rarely do you even have what you got last year when you had 3 undefeated Power 5 teams, and I'll include Notre Dame in that. So what I would tell you is history suggests there's going to be enough losses to go around. Oklahoma will stumble. Ohio State might stumble. The SEC teams will pick each other off. That what you'll end up with is Clemson being one of a couple of undefeated teams. Where Clemson could get in trouble is if they were to have a loss, and now all of a sudden it becomes a beauty contest of 1-loss teams, which I think is more likely than a beauty contest of 0-loss teams. If you have a beauty contest of 1-loss teams and they're playing in the weakest conference and they have a loss to BC or, NC State, then that becomes a problem for Clemson. Because we saw the last couple of years with Ohio State. The reason why Ohio State got knocked out of the playoff mix the last couple of years is losing to unranked teams. Losing to Purdue last year, losing to Iowa the year before.
And, we're visiting with Ralph Russo of the Associated Press. He's been covering college football for the AP since 2005. You can get him on Twitter at Ralph D. Russo AP, all one word. So before we get back into the college football, I briefly want to talk to you, and you post, because I'm looking at your Twitter feed right now, and you've posted about SB 206 being signed into law today in California. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a potentially big deal. This law doesn't go into effect until 2023. I believe there's a lot of unknowns here. We're a long way from this law going into effect. Again, 2023. There's also a big thing looming, and that is, in the next month or so, the NCAA is going to unveil its own plan about how it might go about allowing college athletes to have compensation for their names, images, and likenesses. So to an extent, the NCAA could end up making all of this moot, right? I mean, they could come up with a plan that sort of satisfies California to an extent where there won't need to be one law in one state. South Carolina is playing with this. New York is playing with a similar law. This will also be challenged legally. And I've talked to some lawyers who say, hey, the NCAA probably has a pretty good chance here of winning a case against this law if it's challenged. So I think that there's a lot of, wow, look at this. This is going to bring down the system, because we're seeing it happen today. But there's a whole bunch of context here and other events that will impact what this really means. We're sort of at the beginning of a long fight and a long process here. This is sort of step one, not a momentous step that will immediately affect change.
I think one of the fascinating dynamics, God, and there's so many around the country, state to state, is this great dilemma that a school, let's just say Alabama, in the state of Alabama, you may have somebody in the state of Alabama who is a legislator, a politician, who wants to get attention, right? And so he wants to introduce a bill like what they've just put out there in California. And let's say that it's been enacted and now it's being utilized by USC, and USC is using it as a recruiting tool against the University of Alabama. Well, Alabama doesn't want the whole system to come crashing down necessarily. So what do? You've got this incredible dilemma. What do you think that other states are going to start to adopt this thing? I know we're in the formative stages, but could this end up being, a slippery slope that really snowballs?
I think if it gets to that, what you'll see is the NCAA conform. Like, I really don't. Like, I don't think we are in danger of the NCAA abandoning all the California schools. I think the major impact of these laws, or this law and possibly future laws, is more as a pressure point for the NCAA to make changes within itself. I also think that there's some legal precedent here. If the NCAA is treated legally like a sports league, it's not, but it might be treated by some judges as a sports league, where the sports leagues get to determine their rules for a national organization. And I don't know if state by state laws changing the rules for your organization, I could see that being struck down. So I think where this thing will, I think, have its greatest impact is in pushing the NCAA to change its rules more than a patchwork of different rules being created across the nation. I think we're a long way from having something like that happen. That seems like a doomsday scenario, and I don't know. I'm not quite into that doomsday scenario.
We're visiting with Ralph Russo, a longtime Associated Press college football reporter, and I just mentioned this to a reporter we just had on, Zach Zager from Law 360, who's been covering SB 206 in Sacramento. And you're invoking, and I do this, believe me, we all do it in this business, covering college football and college sports, invoking something like the doomsday scenario, right? But if you think about that principle, what's doomsday? Doomsday is the players get traded, they get treated fairly.
Sure.
For a post NCAA world is the fair world, right?
Oh, no. Listen,
it's a doomsday for them. I understand what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a complicated sort of mindset when it comes to compensating the players. It may be a little wishy-washy. Like I believe that they should hold name, image, and likeness. I think that the NCAA would probably be best regulating a market as opposed to trying to set up a market for that. I think that the players should be getting like salary? Probably not. But again, that goes into a whole different other area of why I think that. But you're right. I mean, when I say doomsday scenario, I mean a scenario that brings down the NCAA as we know it. And the NCAA has been hit with a bunch of things that we thought could bring down the NCAA, right? The O'Bannon case, the Alston case. So they've lost a bunch of cases in court, but yet foundationally are still standing. Right. So, but what has happened is those cases have pushed other change. So they've morphed and had to recreate some of their rules to accommodate those cases. And my guess is in the long run, this will be another example where some political pressure, legal pressure mounts up and it forces change within the NCAA.
It's just, I don't know what to say. It has a negative connotation. It's beyond ironic that you have the California heavies, the big schools, coming out and saying that they're not for SB 206. Mm-hmm. It's just, I just shake my head. But that's, and you have someone like Gene Smith, coming out publicly, of all people, coming out publicly and saying, well, they're going to be gone from the NCAA. I mean, first of all, the prospect of that happening, that's absurd.
Yeah. I would believe that when I see it, quite frankly.
Right. So let's get back to the college football. We're talking to Ralph Russo, AP college football writer, all the way back to 2005. And I want to get, first of all, to Ohio State, because I think that's the one school, at least that I'm looking at, because I don't have any idea. A lot of people seem to have a grip on Ohio State, but I haven't seen Justin Fields try to throw the football against a good defense or a good secondary yet. I mean, what are your thoughts on it? How good is Ohio State?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make a pretty good case for them to be the number one team in the country right now. But
really?
Listen, we're a month into the season, and my caveat would be, do we know so much more about Alabama than we do Ohio State? Indiana and Nebraska.
Good point. Yeah.
Not that much different than South Carolina and Ole Miss. And they've been so overwhelmingly dominant. So when I say you can make a case for them to be the number one team in the country right now. That's a thing that changes from week to week, right? I could change my mind next week if I see something I don't like at Michigan State and say, no, they're not the number one team in the country. We're still gathering information. I do think that this Ohio State team and what I see out of Fields does look like a very different beast than we have seen in the last couple of years, where they've had these slip ups and they've looked a little incomplete in certain areas. And this team really does look like have signs of being a juggernaut. But yeah, listen, Michigan State will be the best defense they've played so far. So we'll learn a lot more. We're still in the information gathering stage for a lot of these teams.
Now let's talk about a team everybody loves to talk about. I know I like to talk about them in the context of Schadenfreude every single year. They're a little bit like the New York Mets and Jets to me. I have no connection to the New York Mets and Jets, but I love going on Twitter and just watching the tweets hurtle through the air. Tell me you're not a Mets fan. Are you a Mets fan or a Jets fan?
I'm a Mets and Jets fan. So I was born with that across the banner. Yeah.
I am just the sadist, right, so to speak. And but Michigan football is this constant soap opera. So many college football programs are these days. But what are your thoughts about Jim Harbaugh?
My general feeling on Harbaugh is a lot of the criticism up until late last year was overblown. He is a guy people, as you said, sort of like to hate, love the Schadenfreude. I felt like that program heading into the Ohio State game last year was as healthy as it has been since the Lloyd Carr era. He had some failings, but really I think we were more nitpicking than we were really had bona fide reason to really drag Harbaugh and Michigan. Since that Ohio State game, though, they played 3 big games and gotten destroyed in each one. They seem to be searching for identity offensively and throughout their program after what happened with Wisconsin. It's the first time I felt like under Harbaugh that the criticism probably holds some more water and that they might have something of an existential going on here as what do we want to be? How good can this program really be? There becomes question of like, if not Harbaugh, who? Like, if Harbaugh can't get this done, is there something fundamentally, systemically wrong with Michigan football that the landscape of college football has changed in a way where Michigan can't be elite? Right. Or Michigan will struggle to be elite. So that's where I am on that whole thing. I think what's happened in the last 5 or 6 Michigan games dating back to last year that's pivoted to a point where now I think it's fair to question what does this all mean and where is this all going?
Right. And you brought up the game, and you can't emphasize that enough. The fact that Michigan had such a great year, and I can't remember a year where literally ever where Michigan was more built up as this is it. This is now the new Michigan college football playoff. We're back, baby. And we've got our favorite son running the team. And to have a loss that shattering, that definitive against the team that was completely embarrassed by Purdue in the worst possible way, right? I mean, I think I look at Jim Harbaugh now on the sidelines, this is pop psychology. I don't think he's recovered. He doesn't look like the same guy.
I do think there is a reasonable question to ask if that loss broke the program in some way, shape, or form. If again, it broke the plan, if it forced a coach who had a pretty good idea of what he was doing and where he wanted to be into rethinking things in a way.
It unmoored the program.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think because that's what I'm wondering.
Right.
That's literally what I'm wondering.
Because they look so different this year.
Is what are you trying to do now? Is if it shakes you to your foundation to the point where now you have no foundation and you're sort of rethinking your core principles, and again making you think like, is there something bigger here that's at play and that's keeping us from winning these games than just my strategy?
What do you? I think this is a team that's maybe not quite at the level of Ohio State, but I'm not so sure. But it's one of these mystery teams. There's 2 more I want to ask you about. The first one is Auburn. What's your assessment of Auburn? How good is this team?
Yeah, I've been a little hesitant to sort of put them in the upper tier group. I think that there's a tier of about 6 teams: Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Georgia. LSU seems to have moved into that tier. And I've been hesitant to put Auburn in that tier because I think we're past the point where defense wins championships in college football. You got to have some dynamic offense, and they seem to the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season be protecting a freshman quarterback. You're not going to play dynamic offense protecting a freshman quarterback. It was good enough to beat Oregon. It was good enough to beat A&M. A&M. Thank you. It was good enough to beat A&M on the road. But last week, what we saw against Mississippi State was a dynamic offense. Was an offense that didn't. So
that was not a Nebraska with Ohio State situation. You don't think Mississippi State is just kind of falling off a cliff?
I mean, listen, I don't think that's a top 15 team by any chance. So maybe it's an equivalent, but I also don't I don't dismiss performances like that. We do that a lot in college football. I think fans they didn't play anybody. It doesn't matter. Listen, Mississippi State's an SEC team that will probably get to a bowl game. If you beat that team like a Sun Belt team, that's significant to me. I know Nebraska is not a top 15 team, but if you knock Nebraska around like they're a low-level MAC team, that is significant to me. So I don't draw nothing from those type of games. I understand we still have more to learn, but I think that's a significant sign that you're moving into an elite tier, because that's what we expect of our elite teams. We expect of elite teams to face these, mid-tier teams in their conferences and not struggle, but to blow them away. That's why we bumped down Clemson this week, because they had some struggles against one of those mid-tier teams in their conference.
It's interesting. We're visiting with Ralph Russo of the Associated Press, longtime college football writer. It's interesting that you bring that up, because you really made me rethink Ohio State in the context of one team. And I think if I was going to look at Ohio State's schedule, including Nebraska, I would say their total annihilation of Cincinnati might be the best tell on that schedule. I'm not saying Cincinnati is a world beater, but they took care of UCLA no problem. And so far, that's their only loss. And I think Luke Fickell is a wildly underrated head coach, and should be, every coaching position, I think, should include his name in it.
Yeah.
Or maybe Brooks, you're crazy.
No. I actually agree with you. When they did that to Cincinnati, that caught my
attention. Because I was thinking, Ralph, wait a minute. I thought UC was good.
Yeah, at least good enough to hang. Right. And that's what I'm trying to sort of get at with a lot of these games that we are so quick to dismiss. Well, it's only Indiana. It's only Nebraska. It's only Cincinnati. But, occasionally these teams are built to at least be able to hang. And we see what Alabama is the best example. They generally don't let these teams hang around, right? They drop the hammer on these teams that are sort of second class in their conferences and around the country. So when that happens, it definitely makes you – and listen, the reason why we were so hesitant about Ohio State over the last couple of years is they let Nebraska hang around literally last year in the shoe. And they've let Minnesota hang around a little bit. And we've held that against them. So when they're no longer doing that, when they're playing these teams that you think, oh, they might be able to hang around, and no, they're not. They're laying waste to them in basically a half. You have to draw something from that. Maybe you're not getting the full picture, but it's not nothing.
All right, last question for you. Oklahoma. I think of all the big schools out there, when you look at, and I'm a sports media junkie, I watch ESPN all day. I watch all of the channels. I watch FS1 and stuff like that. Not that you're going to get a lot of college football talk there, but I would say of all the powerhouses, Oklahoma probably is the most overlooked in my experience. I mean, Clemson's relentless. Dabo's relentless. The SEC's relentless. We're hearing about Clay Helton, but we're not hearing really about Oklahoma. And I don't know the answer. This is why I'm asking you the question, but is this an Oklahoma team that could match what we've had the last couple of years in terms of offense, or come close to that and have a better defense?
That's what it looks like so far. And again, going back to the theme of our last few minutes,
right?
I don't think these games mean nothing, right? I think you're cutting yourself short if you take nothing from the fact that, wait a second, last year Oklahoma allowed, and I was looking at it last night, 6.1 yards a play defensively. Very bad, near the bottom third of all of FBS. This year, they're about 5.3. We're very early in the season. They just played a Texas Tech team that didn't have its starting quarterback. Clearly, that held it back. But nonetheless, we're seeing a legitimate improvement on this Oklahoma defense. And the offense somehow is even better, which is outrageous. Like, Jalen Hurts is actually putting up better numbers than Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield. I think the reason why, to answer your question more directly, Brooks, that we have had a little less Oklahoma talk over the first month of the season is they just really haven't played any big games yet. They're the most off the radar as far as who they've played and when they've played. I don't think they've had a prime time. Well, I guess the Houston game was a prime time game, so that drew a lot of buzz.
UCLA I watched the UCLA game. I watched the whole game, and and I actually, here's the thing: UCLA should not be as bad as they are, and that quarterback DTR, he is not bad. He is overmatched, very much so in the early going, but they devastated UCLA. But I want to ask you one quick. This is an off the board non sequitur. As I think about Oklahoma being in the Big 12, you think about the benefits and the fact that Texas has the Longhorn Network and kind of kept all the money to themselves. That's perhaps why A&M, Nebraska, and Missouri left, because the Longhorn Network, that was created by Texas and for the television revenue with ESPN. And of course, you've got the SEC network, and now we've got the ACC network, Big Ten network. That's such a financial windfall for those schools, a lifeline in a sense. But Oklahoma seems to be out there. I know they had kind of a special deal television-wise, but take out your crystal ball for a second if you've thought of this. Do you think we could have a massive reconfiguring of conferences in the future where the Big 12 maybe ends up being broken up and OU perhaps goes to the Pac-12? Or do you think Larry Scott could be somebody who might want to change the face of how things are looking west of the Mississippi because he's so desperate? I just think Oklahoma's sitting there, and it's like this sleeping giant. And for my money, they've got to be leaving cash on the table. And the fact that they're not getting this is the way I look at it, Ralph. They're not getting the money that Vanderbilt's getting from the SEC network. They're in the Big 12. They're not getting anything.
Yeah. Let me see if I can make this a relatively short answer, because it's a huge question. Right. Once you get into conference realignment, it's a huge question. I would say Oklahoma, I think the reason why Oklahoma, some of the talk of leaving the Big 12 behind has been tamped down. Oklahoma's brand is championships, right? And Oklahoma is the big dog of the Big 12, at least on the field. You know, Texas has a lot of the power and the money, but Oklahoma, they got the trophies.
As a practical matter, every year on the field, right?
Yeah. So now what you're saying is, I think, conceivable that especially the Pac-12 and the Big 12, there's something there that I think that
there was in 2012.
Yeah, I do think that there's something there that would accommodate both of those conferences as far as getting a Texas and California recruiting base. But again, that's such a large discussion. I do wonder I do think that a lot of the things that will hold the Big 12 together as we go forward are the idea that A, Texas has a lot of power in the Big 12 and wants to keep it, and B, Oklahoma, the other big power in the Big 12, can remain a big power in the Big 12, as opposed to if you go to the SEC and now you're just another powerful school.
That's interesting.
And you're just another powerful school with USC in a conference that doesn't quite fit you geographically or maybe academically in the Pac-12. So you can say, if you're Oklahoma, we want to do all this moving around. But what does that do to your brand when your brand is championship trophy?
Yeah, this is amazing because I've studied Bud Wilkinson a lot. I've researched him. I've done a lot of research on college football history. And what you just described, this is amazing because I had never thought of Oklahoma present day in this context. But Bud Wilkinson and Oklahoma scheduled nationally. They were outliers, and they became a national program deliberately. They went out of their way to try to put Oklahoma on the map. And That was the strategy back then. And of course, they couldn't have been more successful. And for all people outside of Oklahoma knew, they didn't play in the Big 8 or the Big 6 or the Big 7. They didn't lose a game in that conference for something like 12, 13 years. But every year they would play huge non-conference games in other regions. They go up to the Northeast. This was Oklahoma's DNA that was being developed. And I think what you're talking about right there, we're seeing vestiges of it.
I would say this. Look at what happened. Listen, I'm sure Nebraska loves the Czechs, and they were losing some of their national identity even within the Big 12. But Nebraska has become just another Big 10 school. Maybe not just another. Maybe Nebraska still clearly has a bigger brand than Minnesota. It clearly has a bigger brand than Northwestern. So just another might be a little bit of a stretch. But what would happen with Oklahoma if they move out of becoming the big dog, and do they lose that status as, again, do they become more of just another team in another conference as opposed to the team that dominates?
And, as far as Texas is concerned, and we learned this with their relationship with A&M, doesn't matter what school you are, how big you are, Texas will always look at a competitor like OU or A&M as just another ship passing in the night. I don't think Texas is ever, whether it's DeLoss, we can all blame DeLoss, and he deserves all the blame for back then and forming the network and doing what they did. But in the end, I think OU has that in its DNA from the past that we've talked about, and now we have it in the present. And it's also, though, a function, I think, of Texas. So, well, thanks for putting up with me, man. I appreciate all these long, rambling questions. You fielding them.
Nope. No problem, Brooks. It was fun.
All right, that's Ralph Russo, longtime Associated Press college football reporter, and God knows I have followed his timeline forever, over a decade by now, and he is on the cutting edge of college football. And interesting that a guy, Mets fan, Jets fan, does college football. That's what makes America great, right? So coming up, we're going to talk shortly, in short order, with Greg Allman. We're going to go out to him and visit with him in Tampa, where he has just spent the last hour or two visiting with the coaching staff and the players of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are the biggest story right now in the National Football League in the last 24 hours, and will be until, I think, next Thursday, because certainly tonight's game, the Monday Night Football game, isn't worth mentioning. That shall remain nameless. So the Buccaneers, with an improbable victory, of course, as Ralph has mentioned, as Bruce Hooley mentioned earlier in the show, there's really no such thing as surprises when you're like a month into the season. And what's funny is, I can't tell you the number of times over the years, just in general, or the whole principle of overreacting, right? It's gotten to the point where now that is like a word that people install, right, as a part of the format of their show. We're going to overreact on Monday. You probably heard people say that by now, right? But I think we've all acknowledged that that's what we're doing, and it's kind of a sport, if you will. And that's a little bit detached and removed from reality. We're just kind of like a cat batting a ball of yarn back and forth with ourselves, right? Because why are you going to jump off a cliff if the Rams beat Cleveland in Cleveland, right? And you're going to cut bait on Baker Mayfield. You're going to say he's the most overrated quarterback in the NFL, right? In the aftermath of that loss to the Rams. I mean, ridiculous. It's a long season, right? And so, but in doing all that stuff, in the back of everybody's mind as they do it, whether it's a person watching television, watching people in the sports media, or the sports media people themselves, I've been in this world, my entire adult professional life. Everybody knows what's going on. Just like everybody knows that Jalen Ramsey didn't have the flu. If he had the contract that he wanted, or the plane situation in Jacksonville that he wanted, he wouldn't be going to visit his girlfriend for the birth of his second child. He wouldn't have a bad back. We all know those are lies. They're just dead flat lies. Yet we suspend disbelief. That's kind of the nature of sports talk and the sports talk industry, right? So why is that? Right. Well, it's an escape. People want to be entertained. They don't want to think about the day-to-day of their life. In some cases, I suppose, but in other cases, it's because the people that you're watching and listening to are employed by a company whose business model is based on revenue from the commercial spectator sports leagues, the NFL, NBA, all that. 99% of the people, 99%, right, of sports talk show hosts you're going to hear on the radio have some sort of affiliation or association. I'm not saying they're not getting paid directly, but the company that they work for, right, the lifeblood of that company financially is derived from the NFL, Major League Baseball, college football conferences, you name it, right? And so it becomes critical to maintain favorable relations, obviously, with these sports leagues. And I'll give you an example, right? We've got a new president at ESPN. His name is Jimmy Pitaro. Jimmy Pitaro is the new president at ESPN. And he is doing everything he can in his power, literally. You think about, like, in college football with coaches, and Bruce mentioned this earlier, Bruce Hooley, when we talked to him in Columbus. Urban Meyer's whole life is recruiting 24/7, right? That is literally all that matters. And you look at somebody like Alabama, Nick Saban. He's a great recruiter. That's what he does. By the way, I'm just checking in with my producer, Cam Smith. How are we looking, Cam? Are we looking at 10:50 for Greg Allman? Just touching base, just to make sure we're on the same page as far as this goes. Okay, we're going to be visiting with Greg Allman of The Athletic. Thanks a lot, Cam. Great job today and every day. Our producer in Boston here on Fancred. We do this Monday through Friday from beginning about noon Eastern time to right around 2 o'clock, in that neighborhood, in that range. I hope you'll come in here every day. You got me on your phone. You got the app on your phone. Jump into the community. There's people on the phone, inside your phone in that app, who are sports fans who follow the teams that you follow. In addition, on Fancred, I want to remind you, if you're new to the app, or I want to tell you, not remind you, but I'll remind you, if you're not new to the app, that during the games on Sunday, National Football League games, we have something called Fourth Quarter Live with the Dallas Cowboys, the New England Patriots, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. All those teams, when they go into the fourth quarter, right, come on to this app that you're on right now, the Fancred app, right, and look for the on-air button. And you're going to find some amazing shows from some of the big personalities in the cities of those NFL teams. And it's a second screen experience on your iPad or your phone. So when you're watching the fourth quarter of the New England Patriots game, one of the top media personalities in Boston, Mike Felger, is right there with you on the couch. And here at Fancred, they can pull you up on the same screen with Mike and with the other hosts for Fourth Quarter Live. Same thing goes for the Dallas Cowboys. We've got that. We've got a great group of guys who do those broadcasts. So again, to try to drill down, in the fourth quarter, when you're on the app, go to the on-air button. Go to the on-air button, and you will find those shows listed, and they go live right at the beginning of the fourth quarter for those NFL teams, and you'll find guys hanging out. But they happen to be some of the high-profile sports media personalities in that town, right? Extremely knowledgeable. And so it's a unique, cool experience. And you can only get it here, and you can only access those personalities. Guys like me. You can do it with me on this show. You look at the fan line button on the screen, right? You can come up on screen with me and on screen with them. and kick it around, chop it up, talk football, talk about what's playing out in real time. That's why I'm doing the show here on Fancred. It's that unique sort of interactivity you're not going to get anywhere else at all. I mean, look at what we've done so far with this show. It's been unbelievable. We've got an incredible national show. Appreciate you stopping by every weekday. And coming up, we're going to talk Buccaneers and Rams with Greg Allman, the beat reporter for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on The Athletic. Now, I was talking about college football earlier. I was talking about the nature of the relationship between a sports radio host or a sports talk show host on television, right? That relationship to the leagues and conferences, right? That is going to color what you're going to get on the air, because the relationship between those networks, those employers of those hosts, right? They've got to have a great relationship with the leagues, or they're not going to have those broadcast rights contracts. So if you've got a host on ESPN, like, say, Jemele Hill, you might remember, Jemele Hill was not suspended at ESPN for tweeting about Donald Trump. She was suspended at ESPN because she went on her Twitter account and laid out a scenario in which her followers might boycott the sponsors of NFL teams. That's when she got suspended. What does that tell you? It's all about the relationship there. But I wanted to dovetail that into Monday Night Football. That's the whole reason I was bringing this up. And we've got, and I said I wasn't going to mention the teams, but I'm going to. It's the Bengals and the Steelers. The Bengals and the Steelers. Now, I told you we have a new president at ESPN, Jimmy Pitaro. Jimmy Pitaro has been working night and day for a couple of years now to try to improve, if not repair, the relationship between ESPN and the NFL. It had fallen into disrepair under John Skipper, his predecessor. John Skipper, the same guy who wrote the huge check to college football, created the playoff with a swipe of a pen, and wrote that huge check to the NBA. Same guy. He's made more money for people, John Skipper, than anybody in sports media history, and it's not even close, right? But John Skipper was never a big fan of the NFL during his long tenure running ESPN. So that relationship fell into disrepair. On top of that, ESPN is wildly overpaying for Monday Night Football at $120 million per game. ESPN, Disney pays the NFL $120 million to broadcast one Monday Night Football game. Tonight, they're going to pay $120 million. Now, think about that. I was just looking at some of the trade magazines for Hollywood earlier today. And what do you see? Oh, it's a $106 million budget for this film on Netflix. I think it was in the context of the Scorsese film, The Irishman. It's like $106 million. I think that's what it was. ESPN pays $120 for one game. The Steelers and the Bengals. Monday Night Football. Right? Now, and this all is going to come together in the end. Before we're joined by Greg, I want to finish this up because I'm making a point. All right. So Jimmy Pitaro is efforting like crazy. He's efforting like crazy to improve the relationship with the NFL. And he's been doing it over the last couple of years. And I mean, everything is geared towards that relationship, improving it, because that's an integral part of the business model of ESPN. College football is a little bit more important, but number 2 on the list is the NFL. And it could be number 1, depending on how that relationship plays out. So what does that mean, though, when he's trying to maintain? Well, he's trying to maintain the deal and allow ESPN to have a favorable negotiating situation when they're looking to re-up on a contract, right? But also, just as importantly, ESPN wants to get good games for Monday Night Football. That's really what it is, because that's how they're going to make that money back. Advertising, ratings, that sort of thing. Okay. So over the past 2 years since Pitaro has taken over, the quality of the games has risen, not dramatically, but slowly and surely, right? And of course, that all came crashing down tonight when we get the Bengals and the Steelers. Of course, this game was scheduled for Monday Night Football when Ben Roethlisberger was still healthy, but it's still the Bengals. So that's a message from the NFL to ESPN that you're still not in our good graces. That's a message to Pitaro that you would put the Bengals, after all we've been trying to do with you to repair this relationship. So you end up with, and now, of course, you don't have a quarterback for Pittsburgh. This is like the worst game in recorded history coming up tonight. So now think about it from the perspective of a host at that network. And I'm not saying I worked at ESPN. I did talk shows there. I'm not saying that hosts obsess about it or even think about it, but ESPN is doing everything it can to try to improve its relationship with the NFL. If you've got somebody on the air on ESPN encouraging their Twitter followers to boycott advertisers of NFL teams, well, that was, in my opinion, something that played probably a primary role in Jamel eventually departing. She departed on her own. I don't think she was fired, but that's probably what marginalized her or began that process more than anything, because it struck at the business model, the lifeblood of ESPN and Disney, that once you cross that line, there's no going back. Now, if you're a host and you're on the air or you're on Twitter, think about how that's going to affect you. Think about how SB 206, what we're talking about today, that is, believe it or not, well, not believe it or not, the schools, you would think that the NCAA is going to fight it. It's understandable. Their existence depends on it. But what about the schools, right? Don't the schools want to help the athletes? Well, maybe they don't. We know that by now. But you've got Stanford's already come out publicly. The president of Stanford has put out a letter that was published in the student newspaper that rejected SB 206, doesn't want it at Stanford, right? How ironic and weird is that? I guess it isn't. But but if you're a talk show host at ESPN, and ESPN's number one revenue source besides cable subscriptions, number two is college football, right? And so we know that's not something positive in the context of ESPN's bottom line, because the schools have said, we don't want this law. Stanford said it, and I'm sure all the other schools feel the same way. Maybe they haven't put it out there publicly. They probably will at some point. I mean, nobody cares about the NCAA, especially in the context of college football, because the NCAA has no power when it comes to the television rights of football. It does for basketball, but not football. That's the conferences. So, and this separate organization in the college football playoff. So now you're starting to understand what I'm getting at, that if you're a host, you've always got this hanging over your head. You're always going to be accounting for that. And so what's going to happen? I think, maybe not the entertainment value of your show will suffer, but the substance of it will, because there's going to be things out there like this law. And there will be people out there that say to themselves, wait a minute, why aren't they talking about this? CNN's talking about it. MSNBC is going to talk about SB 206. Fred Rogan on Channel 4 in LA is talking about it. Why aren't they talking about it? And I'm not saying they won't, but that kind of thing is always hanging over your head, that censorship, if you will, when you work at those places. And so now we got a guy who is the ultimate trooper, who we don't deserve, because this guy's been traveling. He had a red eye from Los Angeles. He covers the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's back in Tampa already, and he's already been to the availability for Bruce Arians and the staff and the players. Greg Allman is joining us from Tampa. Thanks so much, Greg. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Glad to be on. Hope you're doing well.
So first of all, what were your impressions of that game last night?
Crazy, wild game. 55-40. So get your money's worth on that one. Yeah, Bucks did so well to jump out to a 21-0 lead. And as you might expect, kind of let the Rams back into it, but kept answering the bell. Every time the Rams had a touchdown to cut it, they seemed to answer to keep them at arm's length. I think that kind of helped the crowd stay out of it a little bit. And then great finish. Wild to see Ndamukong Suh get to have the kind of the game-clinching touchdown against his old team. Yeah,
that was unbelievable. What about Bruce Arians? I mean, what feel and sense are you getting for him and his grip on this team?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's like they had 28 points in the first half, 2 weeks in a row. They'd done that twice in the previous 17 years here. So getting out and scoring well, good mix of the run and the pass. I think you see Jameis Winston getting more and more comfortable in this offense. Had a rough week 1, with 3 picks. But since then, I mean, this is about as good a 3-game stretch as he's had. I mean, especially the last 2 weeks, kind of did everything he needed to against the Giants, and it wasn't enough to win. And then yesterday, to go 380, whatever it was, 385, 4 touchdowns. He and Chris Godwin in particular have really, really clicked very well.
Yeah, I think when you look at the wins and losses, it might be a little deceiving because in that Giants game, they obviously could have won it easily, had an opportunity to. So when you place that game in that context, and then you look at the Rams game, I'm sure everybody in Tampa right now is saying, are they for real? Is this the real thing? I mean, are they for real?
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I think a lot of people saw 2-2, probably not the 2 wins or the 2 losses they expected. So, yeah, the glass half full is that they, if they just make a field goal they should make against the Giants, they're 3-1. But at the same time, that Carolina win, they were a yard away from losing that in the final minute. So, yeah, they're probably where they're supposed to be at 2-2. I think that helps them a lot with this crazy stretch they're in with 5 road games or 5 games away from Tampa in 6 weeks to kind of take the head off the top and to get a big win in Los Angeles.
That's devastating, that schedule. We're visiting with Greg Allman of The Athletic, covers the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now the Los Angeles Rams. I mean, what did you think of the way or why were the Bucs able to stifle Jared Goff?
I don't. I mean, he had 517 yards. So the big thing is the turnovers. I mean, I think in his entire NFL career, I think he had more than 2 interceptions only once before. So he's a careful quarterback. So to get 3 picks, 2 of them were plays where Shaq Barrett, made plays to get pressure on him. That's the difference in the game because, I mean, they threw the ball, they moved the ball with ease against that secondary. I was a little confused as to why they gave up the run as much as they did. I mean, to have a back as good as Todd Gurley and to run him 5 times. I mean, you want to say the Bucs contained him, but I think Sean McVay contained him as much as Tampa Bay did.
So what about the defense, though, of the Rams? What did you see of that defense?
Yeah, surprising. I mean, you saw I expected more from their front line. Aaron Donald, I felt like, the Bucs did a good job not to really have a whole lot of one-on-ones against Aaron Donald. He had 4 tackles, but I can't really remember his name being called but once. I think he had a tackle for a loss. I felt like their outside pass rush really wasn't that effective. So, Winston had 43 dropbacks and had 2 sacks. So that's a big win for this offensive line. They're still kind of coming together. I think they've given up 12 sacks in 4 games, but to limit, you think about the D lines they've played already this year. I mean, that's Niners, Panthers, and Rams are all pretty strong up front. So that's a position that's probably exceeded my expectations so far.
Describe the progress of Jameis Winston.
Yeah. Again, I mean, it's funny. I jinxed the daylights out of him, and that it's like mid-4th quarter, and I'm like, the reason they're winning is that Jared Goff has 3 picks, and Jameis Winston has played mistake-free football, and he floats a pass that Marcus Peters returns for a touchdown. But really, for him to have 2 straight games where he has 1 total turnover is exactly what they need him to be. To be able to move the ball, his 3rd down passing was great. They went 8 of 13. I think they hit every 3rd down they had yesterday when they needed 8 or less yards. So you're moving the ball, which keeps that offense from the Rams off the field. The big thing for him is just limiting mistakes. If he can have 1 turnover every 2 games, this will be a much improved Bucs team.
Is this attributed to Bruce Arians directly, or is there an assistant coach you think has been involved in helping Jameis get into this position and really govern his ability to limit turnovers?
Yeah, Bruce will definitely tell you is Byron Leftwich. I mean, that's their new first-year offensive coordinator. He's a play caller here. They've got a quarterbacks coach in Clyde Christensen that does a lot of the X's and O's and the mechanics. But Byron Leftwich is probably the guy that has the most interaction with Jameis, the most direct play on who he's become in these first 4 games. I think Bruce has a big hand in everything Byron does as an offense, but this is Leftwich's offense, and he's a big part of why Jameis has taken a step forward.
We're visiting with Greg Allman. I'm going to let you go here in 1 second. I got one more question for you. Greg Allman of The Athletic covers the Buccaneers. And of course, the secret deodorant Twitter thing that came out involving Carly Lloyd. I mean, what were your impressions of that? Because it involved the Bucs, it involved your kicker and all that.
Yeah, I get the feeling the Secret probably had that ad ready to go and just wait till there was a high-profile missed field goal and then send it to the Charlotte paper or the Minneapolis paper. It just happened to be Tampa that had the big miss. And I think they have a lot of good ideas with Carly and with equal playing field and getting women involved in football. That's kind of a strong suit for the Bucs. I mean, Bruce Arians has two. Yeah, Bruce has 2 female full-time staffers. I mean, his assistant D-line coach is a woman. One of his assistant strength coaches is a woman.
With the Buccaneers.
With the Buccaneers, right. Oh, no, he's been way out in front on this. This is a very progressive, diverse staff, and he's proud of it. So I think it's an easy knock on their kicker because Matt Gay missed a field goal. He responded pretty well. He went 9 for 9 yesterday, so he's bounced back pretty well. It probably was a good move for Secret because we're talking about their deodorant a week later.
That's true.
But you know, it was a shot taken for sure.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, Greg.
Oh, no problem. You guys take care. Have a good week.
That's Greg Allman of The Athletic. He covers the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's going to do it for our show today. Great job by Cam Smith. Thanks to our guests, of course, Greg Allman, Ralph Russo, Zach Zager, and Bruce Hooley. And of course, we'll be back tomorrow at noon Eastern time. And from Los Angeles, this is Brooks Melchior saying so long. And this has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.